I'll just do a quick background on myself. I have been in the energy sector for almost 25 years in renewables, in many different areas, including emerging technologies like wind, wave, tidal, offshore wind, et cetera. And recently, when I joined DNVGL, I've started to make the transition more to the maritime side. And conveniently in maritime right now, it's all about energy and about new fuels for shipping, et cetera. So it's been a fun transition, especially working with Washington State on developing this new cluster organization. So I guess with that, I'll launch into this. The picture that you see here is Joshua Berger. He's with the Washington Department of Commerce, and he's the leader for the vision behind the Maritime Blue Cluster Organization. And I've been working with him for the last 2 years. We started by developing a strategy and bringing together all the stakeholders to look at what Washington's maritime sector really needs to do to accelerate both innovation on the sustainable front and competitiveness. So next slide, please. I don't know where, okay, there we go. And we started right out of the gate by aligning our vision with the SDG goals, so much so that our color coding system for our goals are actually around the SDGs. So really quickly, these are what we call our goals, and then we have pathways for each of these. So for energy transition to a thriving low carbon industry is going to deliver real climate action in the first one. Creating an innovation hub to bring benefits to the industry, innovation, and infrastructure through our Global Innovation Hub. Growing gateways and industrial activities ensures decent work and economic growth. And developing a 21st century workforce will create a demand for quality education. And finally, the goals are going to be steered through a world-class cluster in partnership to achieve the goals. And so that the day we launched the strategy and released it to the governor, we also started the new cluster organization. Next slide, please. So this is the different focus areas or the scope of work that the cluster organization is working to implement. We jokingly call these our cluster Fs. Don't think too hard about that. So this included a marketing and communications. One person got it. This includes a marketing and communications campaign to raise the visibility of the maritime industry. While there is a huge economic impact for the maritime sector in Washington, there's not often a lot of awareness of that. And there's a lot of jobs that are actually going unfulfilled. So visibility is key. Also networking and knowledge sharing events through what we call our Blue Forum. Our first one, we brought together the digital sector, which has a big presence in the Seattle area, but they hadn't been looking at maritime. So we brought maritime and digital sectors together in a mashup forum event to look at ideas that they could do. The other pathway, Blue Forward, this is where we're doing joint innovation projects, bringing together a co-competition model where sometimes the people that are competing with each other can come together and work collaboratively on projects to help advance innovation ideas, and sometimes even the regulatory constraints around those. Blue Force is workforce development. We have the Youth Maritime Collaborative. We're actually hiring our first staff member for running that. Blue Finance, we just released a capital landscape study that looks at the gaps in maritime finance and tries to get some focus from our venture capital and impact investment community in the area into maritime. And finally, Blue Facility. The Port of Seattle is working to build a maritime innovation center, actually rehabbing a historic building to house a lot of these different activities, including our newly launched accelerator program. So with that, next slide is the SDG goals that we hope to frame the rest of the discussion around. So to bring up our next panelist, I don't know if you can cue up Carla's slides. Carla Dominguez is the project officer at Forum Oceano. Since 2013, she has been in this position. This is the Association of the Maritime Economy, the entity responsible for management of the Portuguese Maritime Cluster. She's been working with stakeholders, liaison with academics, and senior management in research organizations and the private sector, engaging in cooperation and networking activities, building consortiums, giving support to new project ideas and business opportunities, and supporting international cooperation in activities related to the blue bioeconomy especially. She has a PhD in biology and for more than 10 years carried out research in the fields of marine ecology, genetics, and the management of biological resources. Please welcome Carla.
Oh, yeah.
Good afternoon to all of you. There is a notion of opportunities, and we've been talking about these opportunities during these last days, and these include the diverse sectors that are represented here around this wave, ranging from mature to more traditional, to mature and traditional activities to emerging activities around the sea. The question is, how can we, and clusters in particular, support the SDG goals and the sustainable development for the present and the future generations. So we know clusters are accelerators of growth and of industrial change, and should be doing this in a sustainable way. Go behind helping SMEs, so we should involve the private sector, the technological centers, academia, civil society, mobilizing all the available resources. And so bringing together these key stakeholders, we should find solutions that are sustainable. So because we have the competencies and the knowledge, the innovation to do it together. And showing this with these concrete actions, we can stimulate the transfer of know-how, having some recommendations for the policy making, promoting sustainable blue business, that will also end with creating high-value jobs and creating economic and social value in the BlueTech sectors. And so this way, we will have an impact in all SDGs, because they're connected, they are transversal, but in particular, for example, in SDG, in goal 2, because we can, with marine activities and sustainable aquaculture, for example, we can improve nutrition, food safety, make it more available, use new species not only fish, seafood, but for example, algae and other marine plants that we can help achieve this goal number 2. Then, for example, in goal 3, it is related with goal 2 also, because it's recognized the benefit of the fish proteins and the seafood, and for example also the iodine and other compounds from marine species that promote health and well-being. Then in goal 6, we've been talking about this goal these last days, the importance of it, and 7, marine renewable energy, for example, and the investments should continue in researching more and more in this field. And obviously, and then also in goal 8, this will promote the and an economic growth. It's our hope that the maritime economy will contribute to the economic growth. And at the end, of course, the goal 14 is very obvious, and with the partnerships that we hope to achieve all this. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. Next we have, and please pardon me for slaughtering your name, I didn't get a chance to talk to you about how to pronounce it properly, Naomi Gieri? Giguère.
Yes.
She is the executive director of the Technopole Maritime de Quebec. I'll let you say that properly when you get up here. She's been the executive director since April 2014, developing capacity building projects for Quebec's science, technology, and marine biotechnology sectors. She's committed to promoting the TMQ network and expertise and consolidating the provincial, national, and international partnerships that TMQ has been building for the past 15 years. She has a master's degree in marine resource management, bachelor degree in biochemistry, and a certificate in teaching. So please welcome Naomi.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Noémie Giguère, which is a French-Canadian name. So I'm from Quebec. As the name of my organization said, it's Technopole Maritime du Québec, which is the maritime cluster of the province of Quebec, Canada. My organization is non-profit, and we are working for a network of more than 60 members interested and implicated in the marine sector's development. So we are very near of the SDGs, and I think by our action that we are doing since 2000, where the organization was created, we reach a lot of those goals. So let me present you just a little bit more our network and our mission, and then maybe we will understand why we are very implicated and used to face the goals that are that we want to address with the UN 2030 agenda. So our mission is to bring together and mobilize our stakeholders around shared objectives. We also want to create a conducive environment for development and businesses and organizations. So also by our action, we are bridging the gap between industry and research. And also we foster the success of the cluster at the national and international level. So we do a lot of action of networking, facilitation, also sector intelligence, and we do it in the old province of Quebec, which is a huge territory, but also with the other province of Canada, which is a bigger territory. And also we do a lot of action at international level as we are doing all together today. Also, we aim to raise projects. So we help people in our network to do more and more projects, innovative projects and also collaborative projects, because we think that to reach goals as the UN goals, we have to work together and to have an important leadership. So that's what we are working to put in place since 20 years. So those are our axes of intervention. So we have three principal axes, which are promotion and outreach. This one also face the workforce enhancement goals. The research and innovation axis. In those actions, we do some events and action that put people really together and talk together by events and workshops and other little action that put people together to work together, and also sectorial development by B2B development business networks, facilitation, and other activities that help industrial to face to identify their issues and then to help them to face their issues. So maybe I will just stop there and we will talk together much more after. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. Next is Ove Hegzether. Ove.
That's good.
Hegzether. All right. He is I should know this better. I work for a Norwegian company, but I haven't gotten my Norwegian pronunciations down yet. He is the CEO of the GEC Ocean Technology Cluster in Norway. He has more than 30 years of varied experience from software development, technology management, change and project management, top management and board positions, international networking, business development, marketing, and sales management. He has experience from all sorts of different sectors like oil and gas, banking and finance, IT, telecom, energy, and management consulting for the maritime sector. What better way to run a cluster than have a varied background? He's an entrepreneur and former founding partner of the Nordic Integrator Group, among others. Please welcome Ove.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for allowing me to be part of this panel. Thank you to Michael and for organizing this great event. This is my second time, by the way, here, and I promise I'll be back. We are also a proud member of the BlueTech Cluster Alliance, and they're representing Norway. The BlueTech industry is, of course, very important. The most important thing, I would say, in Norway. It represents 70% of our export income. and 40% of all value creation in the country. So, I mean, this is the real thing in Norway. We have, as a cluster, been around for about 12 years. We are at the kind of a highest level of clusters in Norway, the one they call the Global Centers of Expertise. See if I get this to work. Yeah. Okay, first, this is, I guess, what it's all about. The potential in the ocean industry is said by OECD to double by 2030. And that's really something which is interesting for, of course, all businesses and the industry. At the same time, of course, we have the challenge of the sustainability goals, the climate change, and everything. So from a business perspective, this balance between the business part then and doing it within a sustainability way or a frame is really, I would say, the name of the game for the business the coming decades. And the winner will, of course, be those who will balance this. Just a little bit more about the strategy in GC Ocean Technology. Being from Norway, we have become quite rich in the ocean technology, offshore oil and gas. And we are covering about 40% of the subsea technology in the whole world of the market. So that's a huge industry in Norway. And we are kind of capable in the oil and gas industry of building these subsea underwater factories down to very, maybe couple of 100 meters depth. So the mission of my cluster and the big kind of message in Norway now is to kind of repurpose all this competence and technology into new applications to open new markets for this industry, but also, of course, to speed up the green shift. So that's really what we are doing. And why are we doing that? Well, it's important that this kind of green shift establish a market. It's okay to develop the strategy, to have the policies and do the science, but the proof of the whole thing is the implementation. And the implementation is among the consumers and, of course, the industry. So we try to path the way into new markets by repurposing this competence and technology. So using all the technology, all the investments in competence and all the research done in the oil and gas, we develop now offshore renewables, like primarily it is offshore floating wind, but also we are looking into wave power, we're looking into tidal, and we're also building the next generation seafood farms using all this competence. And a bit further down the road, also going into deep sea minerals. The green shift and the greener industry will need a lot more types of minerals, which is not open or accessible in the open world market today. So that's what we're doing. We're doing this because these companies need a new market. They need to secure the cash flow. They need to lower their risk in their customer portfolios. And that's why we do it. That's the way we do it. I hope to cover in the panel later on. We are doing a lot of projects. We are doing programs. We are doing different sorts of arrangements to help and ease the way for these companies into a more sustainable industry. So thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Lori Dugan. She is the Program Director for the Mississippi Enterprise for Technology, or MSET. She is an independent consultant supporting MSET, or do you say MSET or MSET?
Either one.
Either one, okay. This is a nonprofit located at the Stennis Space Center. She assists companies in finding business opportunities consistent with company abilities. She serves as a liaison with local federal agencies, assessing commercially developed technologies for federal use and federally developed technologies for commercial use. She supports a University of Southern Mississippi contract for the formalization of the Marine Industries Science and Technology Cluster. This one I know you pronounce as MIST.
This is true.
She is a retired oceanographer and holds a master's degree in business administration and oceanography. Please welcome Lori.
Thank you. Thank you very much. As you heard from my bio, our cluster was really started around the federal agencies in and around Stennis Space Center that have something to do with water. The idea is in an economy that was kind of going down in terms of federal funding and federal spending, we would find alternative technologies and alternative customers for those companies that had high-tech answers to military and government solutions, but also would look at those technologies developed within the government and try to commercialize them through local companies as well. So in 2015, we won a Small Business Administration contract to kind of formalize what we were doing, particularly in the blue economy. And I think, as Michael has said many times before, it takes time to get that noticed, to get that momentum going, and then to slowly start to expand. So you get a few successes under your belt, then you maybe get a lot of successes under your belt, then you try to look at, okay, where do I go next? So this is a list of some of the things that we plan to do next that are associated with the UN goals. First of all, we're looking at the assets that we have within the cluster area, and several of them are associated with the university, particularly the University of Southern Mississippi, which in the state of Mississippi is the Ocean Sciences University. There are some programs that support ocean sciences in Mississippi State, in Mississippi University. However, USM is the one that's designated as the Marine Sciences University as a specialty. They have an aquaculture center, and we have just started teaming with them and are working with a small company to help reduce the labor intensiveness associated with offshore aquaculture. So just starting to show a little bit of success in the aquaculture area, and plan to work that into an event that we have coming up in October next year, Oceans 2020, where we team with the Marine Technology Society and IEEE to bring together an international audience that looks at different technologies that are being developed across the globe. So we're hoping to expand that, which is definitely related to a number of the goals. We also are going to take advantage of the Mississippi Polymer Institute, which handles advanced materials and polymers. And how can we connect that industry with the blue economy industry for more sustainable development? We've always been a support mechanism for entrepreneurs and small companies, more connecting them with the resources that they might need at the time, as well as potential customer bases, and looking at where they can really relate in the United States. And through Michael and through other Blue missions, we have been able to start looking at an international audience. And that's really just over the last couple of years. So we're still learning along those lines, but we feel that we've made some great success and baby steps. Obviously, the fostering collaboration and communication. I think we've seen a tremendous amount of information transfer at this event and at other events that we have across the globe. We have to continue that work together, and we have to find ways to communicate in between the events so that we keep all of these good discussions going. And then, we plan to host a number of more challenge events coming up to inspire our youth. to foster some training. We have a cybersecurity training for BlueTech companies coming up in December. So there's a lot of different training aspects that we can bring into the blue economy that are from outside industry. And then one of the biggest things that, my soapbox is, the use of sustainable materials at all of our events. And Michael, you've done a great job at incorporating those. It gets to be very difficult because you're working with venues that have their way of doing things. And it can be a challenge to get force that issue. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And our final cluster presentation is going to be Hein Molenkamp. He is the Executive Director of the Water Alliance, and he's helped position the Water Alliance as one of the leading global water clusters, bringing together public and private companies, government agencies, and knowledge institutes to help new businesses develop into the international water market. Water Alliance is based at the Water Campus Leeuwarden.
Leeuwarden.
Say that again?
Leeuwarden.
Leeuwarden, also known as the European Water Technology Hub. Please welcome Hein.
Okay, then my last presentation will be a little bit about how we have set up our water tech cluster in the northern town of Leeuwarden in the Netherlands. So for me, it's very interesting to be here. It's my first time at BlueTech, and I really learned to know a lot of new people and also a lot of new clusters, which is interesting. Is that if you see there's so many in common, so there's a lot to do also to get to know each other better. So our water cluster is about 15 years old in total. So not very old, but on the other hand, a lot of things happening. And if you look into that in more in detail, in fact, this picture shows almost whole of the story. So I decided to show you this picture and go through it, in fact, circle by circle. What we have set up is a water technology innovation ecosystem, as we call it. It's in fact not more than a technical innovation chain, what is common in a lot of technologies. But what you see here and what is interesting is that we have pinpointed all the important phases in bringing new technology to the market. And in fact, what is the goal of Water Campus as a whole, what you see here, and also where Water Alliance comes back in, is that we try to help companies accelerate bringing new technologies to the market from the initial ID phase to implementation, and that can end up into exportable products. And that seems simple and logical, but the way from an ID to the market is in fact a way full of barriers and all kinds of no's on the way, especially if you're in the innovation. And those of you who are into the technology side, development side, know all about it. You have an idea, you think, well, everybody is waiting for this. Takes me maybe 3-4 years and then it's go. But at the end of the day, it takes you 6, 7, and I know many, many technologies which takes more than 10 or 12, even more years to become successful. And that's a lot of money inside there. And if you are a small company or even a startup, then you won't survive. You can imagine that that takes too long. So this system is set up to, wherever possible, help bring those technologies faster to the market. And for companies, they can decide themselves wherever they want to hook onto the system. So what you see here clockwise is starting at market demands. There may be clever ideas, and they can come from everywhere. They can come from universities or from companies. What we did at Water Campus, there is a scientific organization set up about 15 years ago, which works together with some 23 different universities in Europe at the moment. And from those universities, in total, there is 65 PhDs, all put together in one lab here at Water Campus. And they carry out all kinds of breakthrough type of research on scientific level. And to make it really more market demand, it's not only the universities which are put together, but it is backed by more than 100 companies who are paying a fee yearly to help these technologies being researched. And the research here is more or less breakthrough type of research. So they look for technologies which not even are there at the moment. So that's really challenging. But because of those companies being interested in it, you can make sure that at the end of the day, they'd like to bring it to the market. So what happens here in that phase, that PhDs, they work for about 4 years on their research. At the end of the research, it's in fact only a proven ID. What they do is have an ID and prove the ID at the end of the day, and hopefully there is also some IP involved. And that is then the ownership of the university together with the companies who are working on that. And then you're in the phase, what is here, water application center. That's the next step. So you can imagine that maybe as a single company, you also have a pilot which is not ready to go yet for your first customer. Therefore, this water application center is set up where you can easily bring your pilot and run it on the water you need. You can bring water from the customer, or there is municipal water, drinking water. But what is more important, that it is also a point of education for water technology students. So you will find there students who can help you setting up pilots, doing pilots, and more important is you will also find your future employees there. And that is a very interesting thing happening at this water campus. There is research, there is education, and there is a lot of companies going around. So at water campus level, we have over 200 companies which are member of one of the other organizations. So further on, there is a lot of applied research necessary in most of the pilots. So that means scaling up of technology is very important. And suppose you have the picture what is here at Export, which is an industrial wastewater treatment facility. From the initial research until this end product, you need really scale-up situations. And then a scale-up is sometimes time-consuming. If you are in the Netherlands, for instance, and you want to set up a containerized pilot somewhere at a customer, at least it takes you 4 or 5 months waiting time before you get your environmental permit. So to overcome that problem, we said we need demo sites, we need test facilities. So we have set up in total around 4, 5 or 6 different test beds, or we call it demo sites, where you can test your technology. Well, Water Alliance is in the end of this cycle. I'll speed up, yeah? But because what it's all about is I want to end up with the SDGs. Normally, I do not talk a lot about SDGs in my daily job, because our companies, well, I don't think they use it too much, maybe too little, but if you want to go to finance side or want to get money, then SDGs is a very important thing, especially in the political side. But interesting for water tech is that it is, in fact, they are into all kinds of SDGs. If you look, it's not only clean water, but in fact, water tech is almost crucial in most of the SDGs if you look into detail. So I won't do that for all those numbers, but we can have a discussion around that. Just give an example. This is a technology is used in cooling towers, which is chemical free. So that's more in the industrial side. But other technologies, and this is the last example I show because there is hundreds of examples. This is a development of a startup who thought, well, why not save water in-house? So they made a refrigerator-like apparatus which cleans the water, the gray water in the house from the shower and the wash machine, and that saves you more than 60% of the wastewater in your house, and you can reuse it, for instance, for flushing toilets or use it for keeping your garden green. It's just one of the 2 different examples we have, and the others we will discuss. Keep it with that.
Thank you. Well, since you answered one of the questions I was going to ask you, I guess I'll allow your overtime. Wanted to launch into a discussion now with the clusters, but first, before Michael walks out the door, I want to say that being a newer cluster organization and just launching this, I have to thank the TMA BlueTech for bringing us all together and having the chance for having these cluster-to-cluster conversations. I kind of felt like I was finally among my peer group and not as crazy as I thought I was of how cross-sectorial I always think, and to be among an audience of those who think that same way has just been fantastic. So I thought you might be walking out the door. I wanted to make sure you heard that. All right. So the theme of our discussion is how are clusters addressing United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and as it promotes a sustainable blue economy. Each of you talked a bit about how your clusters are doing that, but what are some of the main challenges that you have found in the process of implementation aligned around SDG goals? I think you each have your own microphone, so I'll stay up here and whoever wants to go first. Yes.
Well, as I said up there, it's kind of the easiest part always of a strategy is to set up or to develop the strategy and also the policies. But when you implement it, you have to reach the companies, and that means there needs to be a market. And what I find most challenging is that the market takes time to build, and every company needs to earn their money. They're in their kind of the purpose, they're a money machine, in fact. So and that's their role also in the society. So the growth of the markets and make them grow fast enough I would say is the biggest challenge.
And we did hear in some other earlier presentations on how some of the finance community is starting to think in that way and align with SDGs, but I know I asked that question around what are the metrics they're using yet in the finance sector. Didn't quite hear an answer yet, but yes, Naomi.
It's a challenge, but it's also, I think, a vision to have. You have to be together and to find some common issues or common goals and to work, I think, on that. So you have to mobilize people and then to keep people talking together and to communicate. So maybe it's a challenge because it's a lot of work to be on field with people and to keep it dynamized. But I think it's the core of the success of reaching goals, because when people are mobilized and together and see the same goals, the common goals, then you can have some result. But if you are only separate people working all by their own, it will not work for sure.
Yeah. Try to actually coordinate, especially sometimes among those who think they're competitors, or finding that nuance of how they can be together, better together for some portion and compete later when they have to. Takes a lot of time.
It can be very, very long. We have a project in marine transportation to reach some goals in legislation goals, and it takes 8 years to convince people to work together. So that's long.
And finding operational funding for clusters for 8 years can be a challenge too. Anyone else on this?
Yeah, it's very similar. So about the cooperation that takes time, and there are other problems. Like for example, for some small and not only small companies are worried to everyday challenges they have problems. Their specific problems, and sometimes they don't have the time to stop and think a little bit about SDGs or innovation. And so this is a process that takes time, communication, and to allow them to just stop for a while and think different from their routine.
Hear, hear.
And what about specifically trying to get the companies you work with to align with sustainable development goals or to be more sustainable in their practices? Have you found success in that, or different challenges that you're facing with the company specifically?
So it's baby steps. You go in, you make a suggestion, you make a connection, and you hope that there will be some follow-on. You might be able to go in and ask about follow-on and reconnect people. But again, these small companies are trying to be profitable, so they've got their mechanisms to move forward. The luckiest time is when you can hit them at a decision point. So if I'm trying to decide whether to use, what materials to use, and a lot of times that means more expensive solutions, and sometimes those are harder to sell. So again, baby steps, keep with the story, and have very positive strategies on how to move forward. And if you can find funding to attach to that, to say, okay, if I'm at a decision point and I've got funding to align with the goals, then that's an easy solution.
Yeah, we did a project where we took a lot of these high-tech ocean companies And we brought them together, and we brought them out to a seafood farm, which needed new solutions. And to solve their problem with kind of sea lice, a lot of things. And the seafood farmers told them about how this industry worked. And furthermore, they told them about which problems they had in the industry. And then we digged it down and drilled it down to workshops where we looked into how these high-tech companies could help solve the problems. And by doing that, I mean, it ended up in contracts. So in a way, we paved the way, and we also paid for everything, arranged everything, facilitated everything, and they were given contracts, which they were in also deep need for because of the crisis in the industry they were already in. So, and that kind of helps and speeds up this crossover, and that's, I would say, a good example of how clusters, organized clusters, can also help them in reaching new markets, which is also more sustainable.
So you organize around the challenge, get different sectors to come together to solve that challenge, and then they're thinking outside the box and also finding an opportunity to tap into new markets.
That's right, and they learn they learn about new markets, and I mean, people tend to stay where they know people, have their relationships, have their network. So we introduce them to these new industries, which we call sort of related industries, because they have some commonalities. So they overlap in a way, so they have something to offer. And that was a great success.
So along those lines, do the rest of you have some examples of specific activities, projects, or programs that you've organized to help tap into those more sustainable BlueTech markets and expose your partners to those?
We have actually similar approach. These working groups, we do this regularly. Like we call seed challenges. There were the seed challenges for 2020, and now the seed challenges for 2030 that we identify with all the value chain. And from these working groups, now there are some ideas, and there are projects now coming, and there's one project very important that is already going on. It's a national project with more than 30 partners, which is incredible. And it's like related with the full valorization of marine resources. And this includes it's like 4 small projects in one. And so one of the tasks is related with creating new seafood, new based seafood products, like new snacks, using new, for example, marine plants, including marine biorefineries. So trying to using also circular economy, and now we can use biocompounds to cosmetics or to pharmaceuticals, for example. Then also related to technologies for aquaculture sector, for monitoring, and then also very important reusability of all the value chain, even new packaging for the industry, and it's been led for one big company from the retail, so it's been successful so far. And there are other examples, but this is one of the most important.
Yes, hi.
Yeah, I think what we have in common is this approach of getting different events and programs together. I think that really helps. So that is, I don't have to recapture that. One of the projects we did, for instance, is, and that is, I think, also an example of the cooperation, which is crucial. That you also have at least your local government having a long-term strategy, and the fact that we want to grow this business, because as I already stated, it takes you more than 10 years. So it doesn't make sense to do a test tomorrow and as a government say to the company, well, what did you reach next year? Because it takes you long. An example of that is that we have set up a project in a nearby town where 200 apartments, new built apartments, were used as a demonstration to show new decentral sanitation. And there was a company that developed a decentral sanitation, which is in fact a separation of black water and gray water from each house. So that's why they do it in new projects. You need a vacuum line from the toilet, which is called the black water, and you need a vacuum line from the wash machine and the shower and the other waters, which is the gray line. And then a small decentral sanitation plant is built in the area of the houses, and in such a way you can have the black water digested and go and also create biogas, which goes back into the houses for the heating. And the gray water is treated in a way that you can recover phosphates, for instance. So that's a very circular economy way of doing. It was already constructed maybe 8 or 9 years ago, that project. And today, now they do the first project in Edmonton. They have one in Sweden. So that it takes really 7, 8 years before it really starts to flower. Eh? And that is, therefore you need a long-term strategy, not only from the cluster, but from all the stakeholders involved. And that is a challenge.
And getting the stakeholders to buy in and be part of it from the
Yeah.
beginning. Yeah.
So yeah, that's true. And then you talk about the different approach and different events that we can hold. And also, I can for sure in 20 years gives you some example in the industry on underwater diminution, underwater noise, and other example with sea processing plants that want to diminish their wastewater. But I think one of the success is also in doing promotion and just talk about the sector. And what we have seen, in fact, in our case, it's that in Quebec and Canada, that works. With a lot of time, we had finally a maritime strategy for the province of Quebec that was launched in 2015. And that really helps to have that stamp from the government. And now we already have the supercluster initiative in Canada. And we have 5 of those supercluster, and one of them is the ocean supercluster. So that's a great recognition of the promotion and the success and all the work that a cluster, I think a little part of that success. So it's really important to have that recognition of the work in the sectors to go further.
Yeah, raising the visibility of the BlueTech sector on its own, but also the visibility of clusters. And what clusters do is a capital C cluster model versus just the little c subsector that's there. Yeah.
But I think this is a message to all people from the government here too. I mean, that's how they can use the clusters as a tool to finance these types of projects by soft money from Research Council or similar organizations. To help also kind of create these markets or the start of these markets and make the ball rolling, so to speak.
Well, I think we have about 5 minutes left. Is there a burning question in the audience? Yes, first hand up.
So it's mostly for Ove and Carla. When you talked about your projects and having the industry give problems list and participate, that's an awesome way. That's what we tell our entrepreneurs to do, to go, ask the customer. When that actually turns into contract opportunities, do your industry partners have funding available that they are earmarking for that? Or is that part of cluster or government funding? Or how are those contracts coming out?
Did everybody in the audience hear the question okay? Okay, go ahead.
Well, it ended up in contracts. So, I mean, because in my example, these seafood farmers, they needed new solutions. So it was a kind of a business requirement for them. So they opened up these challenges and it ended up in contracts. So, and it was a good contract both for the supplier and they as a buyer. So we didn't need any other type of financing than the money it cost to facilitate this, to kind of pave that way into it. But I would say that these tech companies, they didn't know this market, so they wouldn't have been there without the help from the clusters.
And for Maritime Blue, I'd say the model that we're implementing, it used to be a joint innovation or industry project. We're calling them joint innovation projects, where it might be more than just industries that come together. The cluster itself is providing, like you said, kind of that program management funding to bring the players together and facilitate it. But then depending on the certain project, there may be an outside entity that's providing some funding to get the product they want. But to get the players together, they may be providing the services in kind because it gives them exposure to a new market, or providing some funding themselves because that they get to be part of this and the knowledge sharing that's happening among the different players. But yes, the contractual part of it and how you protect IP and nailing down to that can be tricky, but it's workable in a lot of circumstances, especially when it's a feasibility level and you're looking at that high level or preparing for the process where that whoever's providing that additional support may go take the next step and do procurement after that. So that's one of the models that we're implementing. Others on that one? Okay, how are we doing on time? One more question or no? One more question. Okay, I'm going to take moderator's privilege and ask the question I tried to ask a little bit earlier. What about the results from your programs? Specifically, how are you reporting the impacts, the metrics, the KPIs, and have you found a way to do that in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals?
We like report.
I like a hard question.
So one of the things that we have is we have various metrics that we have to report on an annual basis. They don't currently relate directly to the goals at all, but they very well could be. And I think we're going to see more and more requirements for them as we go forward. But the metrics that we look at specifically are revenue generated, and that can be in contracts. So that can be in some development mechanism, average salaries, and then number of jobs created. And I think that's really been our largest impact. We've had our companies report over 100 new jobs every year. So I think we've created a momentum in terms of working with the cluster. Now we need to translate that into how does that go towards the goals.
Yeah.
But metrics is always hard because, I mean, you don't have the alternative. You have these businesses, which is within an organized cluster, but you don't know how they would have performed outside a cluster. So it's a difficult question, but I mean, you need to kind of measure the result as specific as possible in, as said here, in maybe in jobs, in turnovers, in number of contracts, and growth in the industry. But of course, there's a lot of other things which is influencing that too, like how the market in general, the world market is developing, is also, of course, also a big factor here. So it's hard to measure the real success, I would say. But what we do, we count, in my example, we now count, we are about 140 kind of members in a cluster. And if you go back to 2014, more or less, I would say 95% of them were mainly or only in the oil and gas industry. Mm-hmm. Now, if we count them up 5 years later, about 40% of them is now also in the offshore wind industry and in delivering technology to the next generation seafood farms. So they are kind of spreading out, and that's a kind of evidence. We found that this really works.
Yeah, maybe there's a way to measure
Yeah.
growth in new market segments they hadn't been in before.
Yeah.
Yeah, we take credit for anything the companies will allow us to.
There you go. All right, on that note,
approach.
thank you very much to our panelists, and thank you to TMA BlueTech for bringing us all together.